Good afternoon. Welcome to what is now our fourth session as part of our UNEP debates series. I'm very happy that today technology and the digital world and the internet are all working for us, because that will indeed be the topic of our discussion. We will be chatting about digitization, artificial intelligence, and what effect have those got on us, on our lives in today's 21st century. And we will be discussing upon these topics with three brilliant guests. Firstly, Professor Lokke Moerel from Tilburg University. I have to say here on a private note, Tilburg University is also very close to my heart, as that is where I also did my bachelor's and my master's. We also have with us, joining us from Copenhagen, Secretary General of the Nordic Council, Kristina Háfoss, and should be joining us very soon, Kaili, who's member of the European Parliament from Greece, and she also chairs the special panel on artificial intelligence. I do invite our audience to leave questions and comments in the comment section below our live stream today, if time permits. I have agreed with our panelists that we will pass on those questions to them towards the end. But without any further delay, I do want to get started with the first question. And perhaps we'll direct the first question to Amsterdam. Just to get us started, how would you define the term international digital cooperation? What does that actually mean to you? How would you elaborate on that?
Okay, well, Adam, hi, nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Well, I think in this digitalized world, it is impossible as a country on your own to protect and have proper cybersecurity. So if anything has become clear, we really need to cooperate to even protect our national security. That is one of the prerogatives of the member states. But in fact, a paradox, because to protect your national security, you need to cooperate in Europe to even protect that. So is that an answer to your question?
My microphone is muted. I would say so, yes. It's a very direct answer, something we were indeed looking for. I think in today's world, when we talk about sustainability as well, and I'm very happy that we also have a representative of the Nordic countries, which are very strong in sustainability. You can't talk about sustainable development without digital cooperation, and you can't talk about sustainable development without international cooperation. So that sort of goes hand in hand. And maybe I'll direct the same question as I just mentioned to Secretary General Háfoss, who's joining us from Copenhagen this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also thank you for the invitation to join you in this debate. I agree with what Lokke said, that this with cybersecurity is incredibly important. But first, I'd like to say that international cooperation, broadly speaking, is probably more important now than ever. Because if you look at what are the big challenges that the world is facing at the moment, actually all of them need international cooperation. We talk about the COVID crisis, the climate crisis and the green transition. We see a lot of increased inequality in the world, and now also the digitalization and the consequences of the digitalization, both how it changes everything in our lives, also the threats, but how we have to re-educate people and so on. So our world is changing really rapidly at the moment. It's disrupting times in so many ways, and digital international cooperation is one part to focus more on. We in the Nordic region, the Nordic countries, we have set a goal, a vision for 2030 to become the world's most sustainable and integrated region in the world. And for us, digital cooperation between the Nordic countries, also the Baltic countries, the European countries, and every country who wants to cooperate with the Nordic region is vital to reach this goal of sustainability and integration. And as you both know, the digitalization and the digital tools are a unique opportunity to both to create this more integrated region and actually also world, but also if we use it wisely and use the new opportunities, we can create a lot of sustainable solutions and help us to create a greener world. So it's not a simple question, just what is digital international cooperation, because I think international cooperation could be on every area, and actually our lives are, everything that is non-digital is moved into the digital world today. So it's such a broad issue, but one of the consequences of this is that we have to focus much more on also security, as Lokke was mentioned. And I think that is a huge challenge, which we will have the opportunity to discuss further here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the current times we live in, I mean, and this situation that we have come to face, obviously I'm speaking about the pandemic, has showed us exactly what you're saying, that what is not digital sort of becomes digital and becomes online. So that is indeed very, very true. And we will, of course, touch upon sustainability as well. I see that MEP Eva Kaili has joined us. We're just waiting for her to turn the video on. So I will come back. Here we are. So now I'll pass over the same question to Eva Kaili. How would you define international digital cooperation? What does that term actually mean to you?
So thank you for having me. It's, I think, very interesting to be able to discuss with such excellent speakers. I would say that digital international cooperation means that countries through either the regional cooperation blocks or with global organizations could actually collaborate into setting minimum standards, since artificial intelligence is a technology that has no borders, the applications of AI. For example, the European Parliament, we have just recently established a collaboration with OECD Parliamentary Initiative on Artificial Intelligence in order to work together for standards that, minimum standards that we can agree. And I believe the transformative potential of AI and its disruptive also character, they are quite challenging also for our democracies. So to do that, I would talk also about the Global Democratic Alliance. We have to agree on the same values in order to achieve this cooperation. But of course, AI can shape even how our societies can be governed. And we also have the ambition as EU to talk about international collaboration based on fundamental human rights and the respect of the European values. So this is how I believe anyone from Europe would perceive the discussion on this collaboration. So another good example is that even with NATO, we start actually to discuss about collaborating at the level of artificial intelligence, especially in defense, and how to ensure security and safety together. So this means with more member states beyond our EU borders. And you saw what we achieved working with OECD on digital tax. I think this was very powerful. Maybe we could claim that we wanted to achieve the same with GDPR, like to have minimum standards for privacy and control of our data online. So I believe that this could actually be a definition. Thank you.
And speaking, I think this very nicely ties on with my next question. Speaking of privacy and data security, I will now direct my next question back to Professor Lokke Moerel, who's also a senior of counsel at Morrison and Foerster. She's a global ICT law expert. And I mean, you know, we've moved our lives completely online in the past year, which I'm sure many of us will agree poses several different advantages, but also definitely threats. And you know, from a cybersecurity or from a legal perspective, how safe, in your opinion, are we? How safe is the average user online today?
Well, thank you. Well, we are one of the most digitalized societies, and it was great to see how quickly we were up and running again. You know, my children working, getting schooled from home, people working from home. But every upside has its downside, and I think we saw a lot of new vulnerabilities and dependencies. And I'm going to name a few because they are very varied. We saw a tremendous increase in activities of cyber criminals, abusing the vulnerabilities due to the remote access to systems when you work remote. We saw foreign states stealing our COVID-19 research. We saw flaws in the privacy and security of big or the leading video toolings. Words like Zoom bombing were popping up. Because of the increased remote teaching, suddenly, and all the new teaching tools, we saw that all the student data was in the clouds of non-EU providers, and people got concerned about that. And as a last example, we saw how dependent we are on the big social media platforms combating misinformation. A worrying example, I think, is the conspiracy theories of the anti-vax movements, stimulated by Russian infiltration, and the actual lack of tools of the governments in Europe to fight that. So what I see, because of all these new threats and dependencies, that has triggered a debate and a focus on Europe's digital sovereignty. And then we're talking more, it's more than just the cybersecurity of critical systems and the data they process. It's actually making sure we are in charge or in control of the infrastructure we need to innovate about critical new technologies that are required to in the future. And I'll give you, because we talk about AI as well, I'll give you an example. Artificial intelligence. Cyber criminals can automatically, with AI, detect and exploit vulnerabilities. But with AI, you can also, the good guys can also automatically discover them and remediate them. So, but you need to be on top of it to be able to keep ahead of the game. Without encryption, no protection of our research, know-how, the IP of companies, personal data of citizens. But with the quantum computing having such strong computing power, we will have to make sure that we have post-quantum encryption still strong enough to protect ourselves. So these are a few examples, and we see many, many initiatives, and I applaud the European Commission for having such a broad spectrum of measures trying to improve our digital sovereignty.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think, it's also a topic, cybersecurity is a topic that we could spend days, really. It's impossible to really give an answer in 3 minutes. But I also think, when it comes to privacy and how safe we are on the internet, it also very much depends on us as users, what we do with this internet and what we do on this very internet. Moving swiftly to a little bit up north to Denmark, to Copenhagen. So the Nordic Council has this initiative, has this plan of creating a digital single market for the Nordic countries, but also the Baltic states. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this initiative. What does it actually contain of, and how far are you in actually incorporating this into real life?
Yes, I could tell you a little bit broadly about this initiative, and maybe first I could comment, Lokke, talking about this cybersecurity and the threats, and I can mention that has been one of the main focus areas also in the Nordic countries, and to learn from each other, to exchange knowledge, and also we have like an organization to ensure that we inform each other and learn from each other. And later this June, the Nordic Council, which consists of 87 Nordic parliamentarians will, together with also the Nordic ministers, discuss precisely this theme of cybersecurity and hybrid threats on the internet. How can we be better at cooperating on this? So very, very relevant regarding this debate also. The Nordic countries and the governments have been cooperating quite a lot of years now on digitalization. We have this, you can say, a board of ministers with responsibilities of digitalizations in the different countries who meet regularly to discuss things. And in last year, in 2020, they agreed on a new strategy, a declaration called Digital North 2.7. And it is based on three pillars. Firstly, this focus on increasing mobility and integration in the Nordic and also the Baltic region together by building this common area for cross-border digital services. And secondly, to promote green economic growth and sustainable development in the Nordic Baltic region through data-driven innovation and fair data economy for efficient sharing and reuse of data. And the third pillar is promoting Nordic Baltic leadership in the EU and globally in sustainable and inclusive digital transformation of our societies. I know where it sounds very nice and beautiful words and so on, but below these words, we also have action plans and concrete projects to ensure that we can follow up and we can see results. For example, when it comes to this common area for cross-border digital services, we are working hard on getting all the Nordic EIDs to talk together. I think there is also in the EU a lot of discussion now on having an EU EID. In the Nordics, we have been discussing on each country having their own EID is important for their sovereignty and because it's probably the future passport actually also. But it's important that we design the EID so they can be able to link together and talk together. And that is not a technical problem anymore. And we have done some projects on that. Another thing is looking into the public services in the Nordic countries, ensuring that all the digital Nordic services, and a lot of Nordic countries are actually front runners on those areas, and the Baltic countries, of course, too. Trying to ensure that users and people in the Nordic countries and Baltic countries can get access to public digital services across our borders. And then one other more concrete thing is, specific thing is this ensuring safe transportation of data and reuse of data, so you don't have to inform about your same data over and over again. Just to mention some specific projects we are working on. But broadly speaking, those three pillars, and then we have this action plan also with a lot of projects to follow that up to ensure that we move in the right direction. And I can mention that it's very important also that even though we are working to create the Nordic region as the most sustainable and integrated region in the world and cooperating closely with the Baltic region, we are also cooperating with, for example, the EU Parliament, the West Nordic Council, and other parties too. Also, the Benelux Parliament, for example, is a close cooperation partner for us.
Brilliant. Well, I definitely keep my fingers crossed for the success of the initiative and of the project, because it would be interesting to see whether some aspects can later be translated into other regions, right? So not just the Nordics or the Baltics, but elsewhere in the world as well. You will hear me a lot today making references to the pandemic, but I think it's pretty much inevitable. And that is also where I want to go with my next question to Ms. Kaili, who's a member of the European Parliament. And I want to ask you about your opinion on the COVID-19 the vaccination digital passports that the European Commission, the European Council, the European Parliament, countries are all working on. What is your take on this? How do you what do you make of these plans and projects?
Well, thank you. It's a very, again, interesting question, since I just saw today it was announced that we have the European Digital COVID certificate for 9 European countries, and Greece is one of them. I'm from Greece, and these countries are connected in a safer way. It means there is an option also to avoid having to do the tests every time to travel, which actually requires, longer planning, and more countries are expected to join. And the goal is to make sure we can move again towards the reopening of our societies across EU, but hopefully after we achieve that, we're going to be able to have a transatlantic cooperation and also with other countries around the world in order to go back to normal in terms of transportation. The European Parliament, of course, made immediately amendments and proposals that would guarantee that this certificate will include only basic necessary identification data. The truth is, we are now this year discussing about the eIDAS, so a European online digital identity, and the forms it would have, and if it would include biometric data, and how they would be interoperable, the systems among European countries. We have to ensure that if we want to have a digital single market, and these were challenges that we faced during the beginning of the pandemic. So when we had interruptions of the supply chains, when cross-border payments were very difficult to take place instantly. And now we have overcome this because of the need to overcome these barriers. So we are building the legislation on that. At the same time, I go back into what the Parliament suggested was not just to include only basic ID data, but that this data cannot be stored permanently by any national authority, and that this certificate would only be valid for a specific time, the limited time during this pandemic. So it has a temporary use, and it's not going to become a health passport, which could actually mean several different things, especially if we don't talk about democracies, of course, full control and even exclusion and discrimination. So it's only for a limited time, and that certificate do not serve as a travel document. It's not a precondition for traveling, so it's not penalizing people without it. It's just one option to make it easier for those people that have been vaccinated or they have even been tested. So they will have the possibility for an online certification. I've already suggested, in my capacity as an MEP, to use blockchain technology to avoid duplication, to make sure there is no fraud online, and that these are based on concrete and infrastructures, that they are actually safe, and also you have full control of your data. And of course, I think it's a bold measure to provide options to citizens and to avoid, again, any discrimination. So the temporary certificate responds to the citizens that were upset or worried that this could cause discrimination. So if they raised concerns, or if they are listening to us today, I have to say that actually it gives you an option and it doesn't exclude anybody. This is based on the European values I was mentioning before. And finally, I believe that if we immediately start collaborating also at, as I said, transatlantic level, or through OECD or through UN, we could achieve interoperability by design to avoid all the frictions that could come up if we have the Nordics, where you usually have like the foresight to prepare in advance these kind of new technologies, or other countries to develop their own strategies and their own passports to make it possible. So hopefully, if we have common standards, we will be able to use the certificate for good and to go back into some kind of norm.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for also explaining a little bit in greater depth how this is actually going to work. I think what you said about the storage of data, that is something that strikes very close to home, and also ties in with my next question, because at the height of the beginning of the pandemic in Poland, and I think these apps are still in use today, in Poland, every person who was on quarantine, who came from abroad or had a positive test result, they had to, this was mandatory, the police came and checked, had to install an app on your phone, which is called the quarantine app. You had to take a picture of yourself every day to sort of tell the authorities that you are at home. And there were some sort of different algorithms. You know, I'm not a tech expert, so I won't go into all these details. But I do want to ask Professor Lokke Moerel on her stance on how does this reflect, you know, in terms of our privacy, and what is your take on that, on data security as well? Because one of the major campaigns that started anti this app was saying exactly what MEP Kaili just said, that there were concerns as to where this data is stored, whether it's permanent or just for this, you know, for this 14-day quarantine time. So what is your take on these apps, which I'm sure have also been used in other countries?
Yeah, this type of tracing app were nearly used in all countries. At the start of the pandemic, I think a lot of governments had a strong belief that the pandemic could be contained with such a tracing app. It was a kind of tech solutionalism, huh? I think the Polish app, I remember, was developed and implemented in 3 days, and it was very privacy invasive. The knee-jerk reaction was to put all the data, the contact data, into a central database to identify who had been in contact with somebody who was infected, to give them a warning so they could quarantine and etc. Exactly as you say, the app was mandatory, which is not allowed under European law, and they had to upload selfies, etc. The data, I remember, was kept for 6 years and could be accessed not only by the health authority, but also by the police, the state governors, the Center for Information Technology, and I think even all the subcontractors. So you're right. Within very quickly, we had a lot of privacy and ethical experts criticizing this, especially the central processing, as it is not necessary. You can do contact tracing in a decentralized manner, where the matching takes place on your device rather than in a central database. Well, at a certain moment in April 2020, the Polish government had listened and they issued an update. And then the data collection and matching were done on the device itself. And then you don't have issues anymore where data is stored, who has access. And the notifications were just sent based on anonymous keys. So that was a major result. And for me personally, I thought it was great. I mean, it wasn't good that we needed to have the discussion, but the fact that we had a global discussion for the first time, what is and is not allowed, and what privacy by design means in these cases. And the whole concept that you don't always need to put everything in a central database, but that you can do it on a decentralized basis. Also for e-identification, as Kristina and Eva were just talking about, you can do that also decentralized, saves a lot of privacy issues. I thought that was really good. So, well, it remains ultimately to be seen whether the world will be ultimately for the change for the better. As maybe you know, but a potential negative effect is that whenever new functionality is introduced, it sets the new normality. Yeah? And history shows that whenever there's a new technical possibility, suddenly there are other urgent purposes why we would need and use it. And what worries me is, and it was a good thing that Apple and Google built, the platform to enable the apps, and they built the tracing functionality in the operating systems of Apple, iOS, and the Android. But if you take a moment to reflect there, it really fundamentally changes the amount of control you as a user have. And you can uninstall the app, but you can't uninstall the entire operating system without being able to use your device. So even when you're if the functionality is switched off, the tracing functionality is there in the background, and it can be leveraged at any time in the future for whatever app across the globe. And well, during the pandemic, we saw the UK and the French governments putting pressure on Apple and Google, because they did a good privacy by design job. It was decentralized functionality to make it central. These were not authoritarian states. These were France and the UK. So I think it puts quite a responsibility on these tech companies to act responsibly, and pressure may well come from all corners, but let's see how this will pan out. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much again for this bird's eye view of the situation. And I have to say, we also were very pleased with the update, like you said here.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was concerned myself. My family was on quarantine. My mother was actually using this very app at the very beginning because she had just come back from abroad. So there were very major concerns indeed, as you say. Moving a little bit away from cybersecurity per se, and a little bit moving back to digitization and digital cooperation, I want to ask Kristina about the Nordic region as a leader, not just in terms of technology and digitization, but also in terms of sustainable development and sustainability. I mean, it's no secret that when you open rankings with the most sustainable cities, we have Stockholm, we have Copenhagen, we also have Amsterdam quite high up, I have to say. And the Scandinavia generally ranks very highly in terms of the implementation of Agenda 2030. And I wanted to ask you, what, in your opinion, is indeed the relationship, or actually, how can we use technology, innovation, digitization in order to strengthen our implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? Because as we know, we only have 9 years left, and despite the success, there is still lots to be done.
Yes, and we have a huge potential also to do something about it, and there's no doubt that digitalization and new technology can be a huge help in that. As I mentioned earlier, that even though, as you also said, the Nordic countries are front runners when it comes to sustainability on several areas, we have set this common goal to look at the Nordic region as a whole and to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. And one part of this is to look how can we do things even better. But it's not on one area, because all these, actually the whole world has to think differently. We have to, as consumers, think differently. The industry has to think differently. The legislation has to take sustainability into account. So it's not one simple issue, but we can see just in the way how we are using electricity in our house, how we can use less, how we can use things smarter, how we can heat our houses, how we as consumers can choose the right products, our clothes, and when we buy food. When we buy a car, we can use a green car. The industry also has the possibility to choose green solutions more and more, and also wants to, because they see that the consumers, they demand green products. So now also the companies, they have to put out this proof that they are a green company. So I think extremely much has happened just the last 5 to 10 years. I feel people are really changing mindset, and it's not longer a question on if we should think green. It's just how to think green, and what kind of technology to use. So I believe that on every area we have to think how can we do this in a sustainable way, because I think we all know that the world can't afford, we can't afford to continue this way of life, and to continue this usage, you can say, of our nature. And I can mention one thing in that area. A lot of talking going around about climate change, and we also see it here in the Nordics, for example, in Greenland, where the ice is melting really fast, affecting daily lives of people who live there. We see it in the Arctic, changing the new transportation opportunities and also changing, you could say, the political landscape. But one thing we have been discussing a lot lately has been this focus on biodiversity. It's something that we see every day if we go out into nature. Everything is about biodiversity if you are a little bit close to nature. And we are seeing huge problems globally when it comes to that. So lately we have had this project in the Nordics where we have like reached out to the young people saying, you are actually the people who know most about these areas and who have good advices for the more old ones. and actually 3,000 young people in the Nordics lately, they came together and made this paper with 19 demands for the Nordic government and parliamentarians to, you have to put this into place to ensure biodiversity in the Nordic countries. It's fantastic. And now we're working on implementing it and to ensure that this is followed up because our children and the young people, they are our future and they know what is important. And I think today we all know it. So on every level, we should use this new technology, new opportunities to think sustainability into everyday life, actually.
Well, I'm very happy that you also mentioned not only the role of the youth, but that, I mean, the adults, so to speak, are then following up on this and not just leaving it in midair, because unfortunately, very often, I think what we see is that, you know, youth councils pop up here and there, but then they end up just being there, you know, for PR and marketing purposes rather than having an actual physical voice. So here, what you say is a very good example of how to implement these policies in practice. I do now want to head over back to the European Parliament, where I think just under a week ago, on the 2nd of June, there was a meeting between Vice President Vestager on the European Commission's proposal on this legal framework on artificial intelligence. I think it's worth mentioning this was the first legal framework on artificial intelligence. Could you tell us a little bit more about this act? What does it actually entail? And if you were speaking to someone, you know, who isn't much to grasp with technology and AI, how would you explain it in, you know, in simple terms?
Well, it's a big project to explain it very fast, but I will try. You can stop me. So the Commission presented, first of all, the first ever, I would say, European act that would be a law, European law, because we have already worked on in 2019 on an AI framework, but it was not binding. It was just a proposal from the Parliament on what the direction should be. So this time it comes from the Commission. It will be amended. So it's not the final text. I have to start with that. But the proposal is a horizontal regulatory framework that would require everything that would happen inside the European single market. If the provider is in the EU, or even if it's not, that they have to follow these specific recommendations. So the Artificial Intelligence Act uses a risk-based approach, and it sets up a series of escalating legal and technical obligations, depending on whether the AI product or service is classified as a low, medium, or high risk. And there are specific AI uses that are banned in any case immediately. We don't even try to get there. So the most important things maybe to remember would be that it will also include services of products that reach the EU market, even if the base is not in the EU, it's in US, for example, again. So if the output of the AI system is used in EU, it is included under this specific act. It explicitly bans AI systems that they manipulate somebody's behavior. It exploits vulnerabilities it uses social credit scoring. We have seen that in China, banning people from the public sector, like from special services, by their social scoring. And it also provides real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces. So these are things that they are banned already in this act. It remains to be seen, but I have the feeling that the parliament will also be in the same direction. It considers also that AI systems of high risk, and this I think it's also another very interesting point, they are systems that they could harm or they endanger the safety of our fundamental rights. Educational settings, for example, where AI could determine the access to education, so controlling students and the productivity, especially in employment, also the worker management and self-employment. We have seen again cases like that. Essential private and public services, for example, access to financial services like credit scoring systems to exclude you from receiving a loan based on an AI system. Law enforcement, predictive policing, you can understand what that could mean if we would allow it to happen. So we have to make sure there will be huge and extreme safety there. Migration and border control, including verifying the authenticity of travel documents, the administration of justice, and critical infrastructure where AI could harm people or put them at risk. And the non-high risk AI systems, they still have to comply with the legislation we have, and it's basically the product safety legislation. So we take that to a box that we already know. This means we have to be compliant with the AI Act obligations before they are placed on the EU market, and it will be governed by the product safety legislation, and we would establish an EU-wide database for these high-risk AI systems. This would also mean we would have a post-market monitoring for the high-risk AI systems. I think it's also very interesting because it's the first time that we do that. And then we will have an European AI board that will oversee the implementation and enforcement of this act, and they could issue opinions, recommendations, and written also suggestions, contributions, basically. And it might invite external experts. Remains to be seen how we're gonna describe this board. And who should participate. But basically, this means we would have also externals that can observe these meetings and they can exchange with third parties, because these technologies are, exponential, and they are more emerging in convergence with AI. So we cannot have something that is going to be not flexible enough. So this means we have to be able to broaden the scope. And of course, as I said, this is the very initial plan of the EU Commission. Maybe something that would be of interest is that it also introduces strong penalties for violations. So GDPR has been doing that for sensitive data. Now we have it for the AI systems, and the rules apply, as I said, again, extraterritorially to providers also outside of EU, if the output of the system is used in EU. And you can understand that this also affects the high risk, the medium, and the low risk, starting from a fine from 30 million or 6% of the annual turnover, then 20 million or 10%, and then 10 million or 2% of their turnover. And they also have to inform, and if they don't, they have these penalties, launched. They have to inform national competent bodies that there are risks from these systems. So this is like briefly what the AI is bringing, and these are the issues that we will have to discuss and see how the final text will be formed by our amendments, as we have different approaches and different maybe sensitivities in EU and different member states. You've seen the debate on the facial recognition, for example. So let's see what will come next.
Thank you very much, and I definitely look forward to reading the final output and then asking someone to then translate it into language that I will later be able to understand. But thank you indeed for this, for this bird's eye view. Moving back to Amsterdam, to the Netherlands, I think we spoke about advantages earlier. One of the advantages definitely of this online world is that we can skip through from Copenhagen to the European Parliament and to Amsterdam within minutes. So The question now pertains to education, because you're not only a practicing lawyer, but also indeed a lecturer at Tilburg University, as we mentioned earlier. And, you know, education has widely been online in the past year, more than a year now. Is this really the future, or are we going to come back to what it was? Or do you see that with some advantages that online education brings, that universities, schools will try to incorporate some elements of this in a more permanent manner?
Yeah, well, first of all, this is a personal view. I'm not representing my university, but look, again, it was great. We were so quickly up and running, and it wasn't just the lectures, it was breakout groups online, but also that we managed to take exams on a remote basis, you know, without getting too much into monitoring, so, you know, with some slips, in the end, you know, we found a way to do that. And again, quite amazing. But if I look at attending, you know, studying is so much more than just attending classes and taking exams. It's about leaving home often for the first time, being completely out of your comfort zone, finding your way to your own 2 feet, making new friends, finding out new interests, debating. You have to debate topics also outside the classroom. It's about the school of life. And you know that, but I'm a mother of 3 students. 2 of them started new studies in the lockdown. And I just saw firsthand how lonely and alienating it is to have just online education without all the other elements. One came back from England who did study there, very high marks and partying, you know. Now he was alone here for the first time back in the Netherlands, new studies, no partying and lower grades. Do you see? It actually helps if you communicate. So I think we really need to pause before we say, oh, this is great, let's keep this. And then the question is really which elements. But even for me, you know, giving the lectures, it's very hard to feel whether they're engaged, whether they are confused, whether when they want to ask a question. I don't know. I find it more hard to engage them, and that must have an impact on the students as well. Another thing I see, which I first thought was a great idea and now really wonder about, is the recording of lectures. It seems such a good idea. Then you can use them. People can, especially in other time zones where in Tilburg, a lot of people here from India can now look at it at a different time zone. But I also see it becomes a kind of Netflix, you know, passive consumentalism. You look at it when it suits you. People don't get out of bed to come to class, meet up for coffee. There's no or less possibility, or, you know, if it's recorded, there's no possibility of you being called upon, which is an incentive to prepare better. And I thought, look, maybe they need a good excuse to be able to watch it in a recorded form rather than, you know, a default. On the other hand, I think electronic or remote exam taking seems fine. People are really comfortable in their own environment, sitting in a big with hundreds of people. Does it improve the experience? I wonder. But I think we need more research on what the school of life means for education. And I don't know. I haven't seen, we're not there yet. So still too much online to a final point. I see that hybrids, you think, why not have a few in class and the rest online? But the hybrid forms are the worst. So you're better off all online or all in physically. But the hybrid forms do not work either. So, well, I'm sure we will see a lot of new studies looking into this. Do you recognize what I say? This is a much personal experience than...
I do indeed, and I have to say I'm very glad that I managed to finish both the bachelor and the master before the pandemic, because when I speak to friends who are still in the Netherlands and who are still doing a second or third master's, and they are doing this in the midst of the pandemic, and I listen to their experiences, and I just think, well, that is not at all what we experienced, because these were my classmates, you know, in 2015, 2016, and so on and so forth. So I do recognize a lot of what you're saying, and I do agree. I saw that Kristina was putting her hand up, so I'll hand over the word to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just say that we see just the same things in the, you can say, the political international cooperation world. It's been incredible how fast people have adapted to the newer reality. There have never been so many meetings as the last year, political meetings, because it's been so easy to have these digital meetings and meet. You don't have to travel and so on. But at the same time, we are all looking so extremely much forward now to meeting physically, and we are feeling like people are getting tired now of these. It's okay for some time, but after a while, it's like, okay, now we have to get back to the normal world, and all these small things that you talk about, discuss, and do when you meet physically, you can't do the same digitally, and often we focus on also these. One thing is discussing political issues and agreements and so on, but often the big agreements are made in the evening when you have a good dinner and you talk about other stuff and you get to learn each other and the children of the other person, and you keep contacts over a couple of years, and then probably then you can reach some political goals in the long run. So I think we miss it very much also in this international cooperation and between politicians, both parliamentarians and ministers, to meet physically. It's hard to put words on all the things you miss, just as Lokke said, but it'll be interesting to see all these essays and research on this issue, because we should take the best from the digital world. We should learn from what has happened now, but we have to meet physically also. We have to find a good combination.
Absolutely. I think, we at the United Nations Association of Poland, we also moved entirely online. And prior to the pandemic, most of our work very much depended on face-to-face meetings, because we do a lot of work with municipalities all across the country. So we were very much dependent on travel and face-to-face events. And last week I traveled to Wrocław, to the south of Poland, for the first face-to-face meeting with the mayor of one of the cities there. In more than a year, and it was very strange, to walk into this room and see a real person all of a sudden, not a computer screen. But it was a very good feeling, I have to say, and I do hope that gradually, as the vaccination campaigns progress, we will be coming slowly to this new normality, because I think it's very difficult to say that we'll come back to normality. We are dealing with this new level of normality. I am looking at the time, so I will very quickly move on to another question to Eva Kaili. A little bit about the future and digital currencies. Do you think we can expect any groundbreaking regulations in this regard in the future? And generally speaking, what is your take on how this topic, which has appeared time and time again in many conversations, how will this topic evolve in the next years to come?
Well, actually, I think you're referring to the legislation we have ongoing, which is the MiCA, the crypto assets, and also DLT, the digital ledger technology. Basically, Europe is trying one more time to initiate interinstitutional dialogues on regulating crypto assets to ensure legal certainty across the EU digital single market by introducing a more, let's say, robust and proportionate set of rules that would allow market transparency and integrity and also ensure investor and consumer protection. And at the same time, we will not make it impossible to use these amazing new technologies in a hybrid way. So trying to create boxes that are new and they can understand how this technology actually disrupts in a positive way many sectors. So we are acknowledging also that technological developments like AI, hypercomputers and the cloud computing, and also CBDCs, the central bank coins, blockchain, they have become also a geopolitical issue. So even if we didn't want, Europe needs to keep pace with jurisdictions such as China, US, or Asia, and also to try to compete and stay also in the lead, which means we need uniform and competitive European market in crypto assets, the MiCA regulation, and also European market for the tokenization of traditional financial assets, and also the wider use of DLT in financial services. This is the pilot regime regulation, like a sandbox for DLTs. And finally, I think you might have heard that Europe has been monitoring the crypto environment and Bitcoin, but now we are in a much mature period of time where we're even discussing about the digital euro, how it would strengthen and improve the European payment system by promoting trust, stability, and efficiency, but also safeguarding EU monetary sovereignty. And you cannot avoid, again, the discussion when you have China or like even Facebook trying to have in their hands the possibility of having a global, like, let's say, currency and being the issuers of that. I would say that the potential of eliminating, not completely ever, but at least reducing the need of intermediation means faster, more secure, and cheaper payments and transactions. And at the same time, you can achieve great innovations. If you check the NFTs recently, connecting IP rights on the blockchain platform and being able to sell, trade, auction pieces, digital pieces of art, or even physical pieces of art, but with an online authentication certificate. This creates a whole new economy, and it's quite fascinating. So we are trying to have, by the end of this year, a proper legislation that would create legal certainty and would allow innovation to happen. We would have the sandbox in place from 3 to 5 years for anybody that would be included. And this means we will basically allow the players that will participate to basically obtain and keep this license to continue their investments and their operations in a safe way in EU. I think it would be interesting to see, since I started talking and working on blockchain 2015, coming from Greece and having, being in a dead end with how we can solve the financial crisis, especially in my country, where nothing seemed to work. And it was like tough measures of austerity as a solution that the citizens had to pay, and the citizens were not to blame. It was the way the centralization of the financial system failed. So I was trying to explore decentralized solutions, and then I got familiar with blockchain, and I thought, listen, this could actually disrupt our system, but we could use the positive disruption to create more trust and give citizens options to do this in a safe environment while we protect all the sides. And since that time, when Mario Draghi, I remember, responded to me by saying, we are monitoring it, but we don't consider it very, let's say, important. I don't remember his exact words. We are reaching a point where we are trying to discuss about the digital euro. It would be kind of centralized, but then you use the potential of removing this huge, I would say, crazy transaction fees that were like, it's billions of euros that cost the European citizens, plus the delays that if I sent money from Greece to Belgium, it would take like at least 3 days to complete the transaction. And this cannot be happening when you have the technology to do it instantly. So I have the feeling that now we can use the best of this technology and have positive disruptions, and Europe will be a friendly environment to innovation, trying to be based in principles of tech neutrality, business model neutrality, and innovation friendly.
Brilliant. Well, I think I have to say that we are monitoring it very closely is one of my favorite phrases used by politicians and parliamentarians, because it means absolutely nothing, yet it means so much. So I very much, smile when I hear someone use that phrase. I am looking at the clock.
But for sure, they didn't block it. And this is also important for Europe, because you could also have a very defensive approach where it says we're going to ban everything. We actually had some amendments saying, because I'm working on the file, let's like not do legislation at all, which means it's really irresponsible to avoid the fact that innovation will not follow rules. You have to be smart enough to adapt and explore the benefits for your citizens, and not to have and allow the traditional players to create this resistance. You have to be open-minded.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with you. And I also thank you for those words and for saying it as it is, really. We have arrived at the end of our 1 hour. I have to say it was a great pleasure to be able to moderate this today's discussion with such brilliant experts. And I also have to say, as a side note, I think through our panel today, we have shown that technology digitization is not a male-only topic, but indeed, we have many female experts that are there and should be invited to panels such as these. It is something that we pay a lot of attention to at UNA Poland when we organize discussions and debates, because it is something that in Poland the public discourse lacks a little bit. So I'm very happy. Thank you once again, and I do hope that I will be able to see you at some point in the future in less online environments, in more physical environments. I wish you all the very best. Stay healthy, and thank you very much again for joining us this evening.